Namaskar friends, dear learners, welcome to online lectures of CEC. If you remember in my previous lecture, I was talking about educational planning for progressive school in this in this series. I discussed why educational planning is relevant, what do we understand by educational planning. We also discussed what do we understand by progressive school, and we also discussed the characteristics of educational planning. So today, to carry on from the points which we have discussed in our previous lecture, we would be talking about what are the basic principles of educational planning. Because when we talk about educational planning, let's first of all talk about just the planning. Planning in itself means more than the development of plans. It's a process of resulting into a product. But plan and the process of preparing the plan are future oriented. So planning seeks to gain some control over future development. So from here on, let us talk about this is in the nutshell what we have discussed in our previous lecture. Now we can talk about the principles of educational planning. When we talk about the principles of educational planning, first the foremost and the most important principle is that the planning must be one of the aspect of the national planning, and which usually it is. Like when we have educational policies, may it be NEP 2020, National Education Policy, or the previous policies which have been given by various educationists or the committees which have been formed, the recommendation of various committees like Yashpal Committee, they are the general national planning. They are part of the general national planning because they talk about how the schools should be. They also talk about how we should be working so that our future generations are successful as well as happy. Because when we talk about Yashpal Committee is known for advocating for lighter bags. He said education without those heavy bags which students are carrying. So that is a successful education. Second principle of education planning is that it should be research based. We cannot have, as we discussed in our previous lecture also, that to be an educational planner or to implement the educational planner, one need not be a person of spiritual nature, a God-sent person, some Mahatma or Paramatma. Rather, he or she should be researcher, a fact-finding person, usually the creative person. If there is a creative person, then he is advantageous because he is able to perceive the future well. But even if we don't have a creative person, the scientific orientation is very much important because planning is research based. Planning is based upon data. Planning is based upon the statistics. Thirdly, planning must be continuous process, and it should be such that one plan after the second plan should be following the first plan. So the plan which we are making, that should be leaving the scope for the tomorrow's plan as well, the future plan as well. Fifthly, planning should take into consideration the resources and establish conditions at work. This is an important principle because when we are talking about any national planning or the organizational planning or even the state level, then the resources available are very important. When we talk about why do we need why do we really require 2 shifts in the school? Because of the resources, the optimal utilization of resources is at the center. We are concerned about utilizing the resources to the best. So, depending upon how much resources we have and what kind of conditions of work we have, accordingly planning should be done. And planning should also be done for establishing conditions of work as well. Just to give an example, currently as we see, because of COVID, the condition of work is not feasible for having the classes in the school in the offline mode, or we can say now we are using online and offline. But one is regular mode, another is online mode, because of the fact that the conditions are not such that the students can visit the school, they can come to the school, they can stay at school and be educated free from danger of catching any kind of disease. So because of the fact that these are the factors, these are the current scenario, these are the conditions of work, so accordingly planning has been done by the government. They have closed down the school, they have introduced online classes, and that online classes has been implemented by the school's administration. The teachers have been trained as to take the online classes, and accordingly the students have also been given certain training how they should be addressing the online classes, so that it's not failure. So this is with respect to the condition of work. So this kind of a planning, which was more or less at the firefighting level, this was required and was done so that the students will also be safe and education or schooling or learning will not suffer. Sixthly, the most important principle is that planning should be realistic and practical. We should not be planning to create another heaven. We cannot have an heaven in 5 days or 7 days or even 5 years or 50 years. The planning has to be realistic. And how can we have the realistic or the practical planning? To have realistic and practical planning, what we require is that the planners should be knowing the current scenario. They should be able to visualize based upon the available resources, the situations, the real situations which exist, as well as the situations which will be after 5 years or 10 years. Only then we can have the realistic and practical planning. Seventhly, planning must involve active and continuing participation of all interested individuals. This was the point which I discussed in my previous lecture also. If you remember, we said that planning to be goal oriented as well as goals to be achieved, we require that the implementers are also involved in the planning. And how can implementers be involved in the planning? Implementers can only be involved in the planning if they are scope for having the people, the say of people who are working at the grassroots level whenever the policies or the planning is being done at the central or state level. So just to take example of NEP 2020, usually now it is believed that NEP 2020 may be a very successful planning in the years to come. The reason for that is the brainstorming was done at every level, may it be at the school level planning or the university level planning, and accordingly the NEP 2020 presented the guideline. But apart from that, they asked from the public at large. Public means the implementers at large, may it be the school principals, school teachers, even students were allowed to give their feedback on it before it was finalized. So their say has been taken into cognizance. If say of the people who are involved actively and they are the one who are going to implement, if their say is taken into consideration, then the planning would be successful. It is expected that planning would be successful. The content and scope of planning should be determined by the needs of the individual and groups to be served. So this is the point which is in continuation of the previous point, that content and scope of planning should be determined by the needs of the individuals and groups to be served. So that means it should be practical, it should be realistic, it should be need based. And whose need? The need of the people for whom planning is being done. And who are they? They are the people who are working at the grassroots level. They are the implementers. They are also the people on whom that planning is going to have an impact, that is students, who are the stakeholders in the schools in particular, or even in the higher education, who are going to be impacted most by any kind of a planning, as well as the people whose say is very important. They are the students. School students may not be taken up as people who are wise enough to provide inputs in the planning or understand what planning is, but the teachers are there, the principals are there, they should have the say. Only then we can say that the content and scope is as per their needs, because they are the people who are to be served. And they know the people whom they are serving, that is student, because teachers are the one who are serving the students, not the policy framers, not the educationists or the bureaucrats or the other government officials who are deciding or designing the plan. They are not the one who are serving. Teachers are the one. That is the group of people we are talking about here when we are saying that the content and scope of planning should be determined on the basis of needs of those individuals, that is teachers, as well as the groups which are to be served, that is students. Ninthly, planning should utilize the services of specialists without allowing them to dominate. This means that because the planning is done at a different level and for different people also, so we will need experts. But those experts should only be allowed to add something. They shouldn't be allowed to have their dominance, because the experts are also not the one who really know that how that planning is going to be implemented. They are not the one who are going to implement. They may not have that complete understanding of the scenario, but of course they have the understanding of the where it can take, because they are the learned people. So they should be taken into consideration, but they should not be given the complete upper hand as far as the planning is concerned. 10th principle is planning should provide opportunity for all persons and groups to understand and appreciate the plan. That means all those people who are involved, they should be given an opportunity. Just now we took an example of NEP 2020. What has it done? When it asked suggestions before finalizing the draft, after the first draft was through, they asked from the suggestions from the students, of course the university students, the higher education students. They asked feedback from the teachers, they asked from the feedback from the people who are there in the administration, so that the plan can be improved better. So the opportunity which we are talking about, that was provided to them. They were provided an opportunity to provide inputs, as well as they were provided opportunity to along with that they were also provided opportunity to address the issues, to provide their inputs on the issues which have not been covered or which needed further attentions. So planning should provide for understanding, the opportunity for understanding and appreciate the plan. 11th is planning should provide for continuous evaluation. What does this mean? It means that planning should be done in such a manner that it can be evaluated continuously, and apart from that, planning should be done, it should also provide the scope for the others plan to come, because planning, as we understand, is round in its functioning, round in its following or functioning, we can say. How is it being done? We make certain plan, we implement it, we come out with certain feedbacks, and based upon those feedbacks, again the planning is done. So there has to be continuous evaluation of the plan. If the plan is not continuously evaluated, then the plan may not be so successful. 12th and most important is that planning should have opportunity for modification for further actions. For future actions, it should have the opportunity for modification. So these are the principles of educational planning. 12 principles we have discussed, but there can be more to it, depending upon the scenario, depending upon the situation, depending upon the nation in which the planning is being done and it is being addressed. Now let us talk about characteristics of educational planning. So, to talk about characteristics of educational planning, let us take up the first characteristic: choice of best alternatives. Friends, modern educational planning is logical, systematic and scientific process. It is very much different from the traditional planning which we used to do. And the scientific process provides the difference from the elementary kind of procedures which was utilized in the past, and the earlier ad hoc decisions which were taken by the administrators, that is the kind of decision making which we can have or which we used to have, was on the experimental basis, that let us have this plan, if it works fine then we will go for the another plan. Hit and trial methods. So instead of having hit and trial methods, the current planners are more concerned about having a plan which provides immediate solution to the problem, and they are also concerned about immediate and the current problem. Apart from that, they also see, based upon the statistics, based upon the current problem, another characteristic is that the administrators have to adhere to and attend to the statistics and the data available, and accordingly the plans have to be introduced, accordingly the plans have to be done. Another important aspect is teamwork. So what does teamwork means? Friends, when we talk about teamwork means that if the planning is to be implemented well, it's very much relevant and it is very much important that the planners and the implementers can work in team. So modern educational planning emphasizes that not only top administrator or the government should be involved in the planning. Planning should be responsibility of all people concerned with the desired change. A team of expert, responsible people and those who are to implement the plan should determine the goals and appropriate ways of attaining them. So this is very much relevant. This characteristic is very much relevant of not just the current planning but also a successful planning as well. Thirdly, planning has to be done for social and economic goals, and because it is to be done for the social and economic goals, so this also becomes one of the characteristics of educational planning, that it is social and economic goal oriented. So modern educational planning emphasizes that goals of democratic society, that is social and economic concern with the welfare and progression of the citizen, should be at the center rather than selfish goals of some special interest group. That should not be addressed by any planner. The expected goals of the society, the needs of the children and young pupils in the school and the colleges should be the broad frame of reference to the educational planners. So this is another important aspect of educational planning. Fourthly, it is cooperation. Cooperation means modern educational planners emphasize involvement of representatives of most of the concerned sectors of the society. In case of education, we would say that who are the concerned people from the concerned sector, which are the concerned sectors of the society for the educational planning in current scenario. As we said, all the stakeholders. And who are all the stakeholders? The stakeholders are students, their parents, the community, the society in which the school is functioning, the teachers, the administrators who are working in the school, as well as the administrators who are guiding them at the district level or the state level, and of course the people who are working at the national level or the central government level to provide them the policies. So they are all the people who are concerned about the process of planning, and they should be involved in the planning. Cooperative planning is considered to be the most important principle of planning in all fields, and it is most successful also, particularly in a nation like India, which is democratic in its nature. Now let us talk about the other characteristic, which is anticipation. Modern educational plan requires that we should be able to anticipate probable developments and needed change in future much ahead of time, so that proper facilities, supporting media and required resources for implementing the planned change may be secured. So relevant plan is the one which knows or understand or can visualize what are the development or needed change in the future along with the problems. If that is anticipated, then we would say that the plan would be successful. So modern educational planning require anticipation on part of the educational planners. Then remedial measures, the sixth aspect, or we can say the sixth characteristics of educational planning is we should be able to provide remedial measures. What does remedial measures means? It's another characteristics of the modern educational planning. Educational planning is being done for remedies and of course guidance oriented. When in my previous lecture I gave an example of the current scenario, which is the COVID. Because of the COVID, we needed certain remedial measures. So we came out with a plan for introducing online classes for schools, colleges, universities, even the PhD level, the coursework as well. So what are these? These are remedial measures. These remedial measures were introduced by all the apex body. For the higher education, university introduced, UGC introduced it, state governments introduced it, the central government introduced it, and at the school level, the CBSE and the state government asked for these kind of remedial measures so that the beneficiaries, that is students, don't suffer. And the problem is also sorted out. Here the problem was to address the disease which is due to the COVID-19. Called COVID-19 due to coronavirus. So with appropriate planning procedure, it is very much possible to identify maladjustment or deficiencies in the system that cause educational problem. After we have found those maladjustment or deficiencies in the system, how to do that? To do that, the person should be involved in the system first of all. That is why we say that the people who are working at the grassroots level, they are most relevant people as far as educational planning is concerned. They have to be involved. Secondly, the people who are involved, they understand statistics well. Thirdly, they understand the system well, the education system. That is the education system. They are the two words, education and system, and both are complex in their own self. So they have to understand what is education, what are its goals, what do we expect from education, of the society, education of a being. When we talk about education, then we should restrict ourselves to the formal education or informal education, and accordingly a system should be generated with the goals of education at center. So accordingly that system has to be done, and the maladjustment and deficiencies which exist in education as well as in the system, they have to be identified. And after having identified that, we should be coming out with remedial measures. After having identified cause of educational problem, we should be suggesting certain solutions. This is one of the main objective of educational planning. Seventh characteristic is scientific changes. Educational planning is being done for the changes, because we say that education is dynamic, society is dynamic, world is dynamic, and now even the situation is also quite dynamic. So accordingly, planning requires scientific orientation. The changes made on ad hoc or at piecemeal basis to solve immediate problem may create some kind of problems in course of time. Hence, modern educational planning carefully and objectively collect data. It interprets, it analyzes interrelationship between present and future need. It also interprets analysis of interrelatedness of the various components of the social and education needs, and accordingly it provides us the framework of an educational plan. So scientific changes have to be at the center when we talk about educational planning. These were the characteristics which an educational plan should have. Now let us talk about why the educational planning, how it is to be done. Just to quote Combe described educational planning as the application of rational systematic analysis to the process of educational development with the aim of making education more effective and efficient in responding to the needs and goals of the learners and the society. This means that the needs of the pupil and the students is at the center, and that is being satisfied through learning facilities, equipment, textbook, classroom space, qualified educational personnel, and the scope for extracurricular activities or the sports. In meeting the needs of the society, educational planning should take cognizance of the manpower, the cultural and social expectation and communication need of the society or nation as well. So these should be at the center. Therefore, educational planning is a blueprint that gives direction for future development of the nation's education system and prescribes courses of actions for achieving defined goals and objectives. Educational planning involves restructuring of education system, forecasting future possibilities, formulating realistic and achievable goals and objectives, developing action plan for implementation, and periodic appraisal of progress and achievement. The political, social, economic, and technical needs of the nation must also be considered at the level of educational planning by the educational planners. Now let us talk about why do we need educational planning. When we have a look at the reasons for educational planning, they are required because of plethora of environmental and situational variables which impact greatly on our educational system. It is required because these variables have effect on the educational system. So that makes educational planning imperative. Which are the factors which have impact on the education system? First is increasing cost of education in nation, because the nation like ours is a developing nation, and because ours is a developing nation, so we are always in the constraint for resources, and because we are in constraint for resources, so we have to keep it in mind that the cost of education in the nation cannot be borne so easily for the nation. So we have to take care of the fact and accordingly plan so that we can have an impactful and gainful education at lower cost. So this is one of a factor which is very important and which requires planning to be done, that increasing cost of education in nation. Secondly, the second factor which we need to understand is the impact of technological development all over the world, because the world is changing every day, and because the scenario is changing every day, so we require the education planning to be done to addressing those technological development which is happening all over the world. Thirdly, the impact of globalization on national development. This is also one of an aspect which is very important, that globalization as far as a factor is concerned, that has an impact on the education system just as it has an impact on the other education system. Or another important factor which education needs to address is unemployment, because we know that unemployment can be addressed through education, through skill-oriented education, through educating the minds and making them understand how to utilize the current resources which they have with them in a best possible manner. So this is how the education can help, not just making the people literate, but also making the people intelligent enough to be able to understand their limitations, as well as within those limitations they should be able to plan for the best possible life which is available for them. Another important factor is social changes. The social changes are happening around every second. The society is changing and education has to address to those social changes, and it should be able to vision that what kind of social changes would we have 5 years later or 10 years later, and accordingly the planning has to be done. So because education has to address the social changes, it has addressed the social changes in the past and it shall be addressing the social changes in the future also. Just to give the example, how the social changes have been addressed by the education system in the past. We know Sanskritization as a system. We also understand that there was social mobility which existed and which does exist. And education was looked at as a tool, not just by the people who advocated of the education like Baba Sahib Ambedkar, but also people at large. So those who educated they wanted to become important in the society. They also wanted the respect in the society. So they got education, and education provided them a power and position because of the jobs which were given to them, and through that they were able to have the better position. So this is how the education has played an important role in bringing out social changes in the past, and it shall be playing an important role in the future as well, because this is one of a basic function of education. So education planning has to be done for social changes as well. Then educational planning has to be done for global citizenship and competitiveness, because now we understand that the world has become very small, and because the globe has become so small, so we have to train our kids, we have to train our students in school for global citizenship and to compete with the people, not just in their community, society, state and nation, but internationally also. Then education has to address inflationary trade, that what kind of inflations which may happen in the economics, that have to be taken care of. We know that education has addressed this issue. We know that there was a time when education meant either becoming a doctor or engineer, because they were the jobs which were giving maximum income. There were also times when education was a tool to become bureaucrat. Then the education became a tool to become an artist as well, to become a chartered accountant as well. So inflationary trend has to be addressed by the education. That for that also we need to do planning. Then poverty is a very important and very huge problem in a nation like India. That can only be addressed by education, because if the people are educated, then naturally they know how to utilize the resources, as well as they understand the value of the resources they have, and they understand how they can address the various agencies who can provide them resources. As we understand that the government may have given lot many advantages to the society at large, in a way that the government has provided to the layman how to address his own requirement. So there are certain policies, there are financial helps, but because of the fact that they are not educated, they are not able to get that financial help from the government. They are not able to apply, they don't have the understanding, they don't have the they don't even know about it. They lack awareness. So because of the fact that they lack awareness, and because of the fact that they don't know how to go, how to apply, due to that the poverty is not being taken care of. So education is also a tool, and accordingly we have to plan for it. Another important aspect is, or we can say another factor which influences education, is increasing demand for and access to education. So when we talk about increasing demand for and access of education, that means because we have lot of population and we have lot many students who are to be addressed, so accordingly education has to be planned. For that, of course, we have to generate more distance education mode. We have to go for blended learning. We have to improvise this online education so that it is of better, it's more impactful in comparison to what it is currently. Then education also need to address the growing needs of professionalism of the educational enterprises. So that has to be done. Now let us try to unravel the kind of planning. First of all, we have the planning by time horizon. From the time horizon, what we understand is that there is long-term planning, medium-term planning. What is long-term planning? Long-term planning means which is 5 to 10 years. That means it is usually done by the top management, and the tenure or the time is for the 5 to 10 years. Then we have the medium term planning. Medium term planning means 2 to 4 years, and it provides clear-cut strategies, greater clarity and action plan for achievement for the future targets. Then from the time perspective of time only, we have short-term planning. This type of planning is designed to achieve immediate future goals. It covers a time frame of 1 year or less than 1 year. Usually, this is done at the organization level. Action plan is one of them, which is usually taken up by the teachers also for their classroom, and that can also be taken up by the administrators to govern as well as improvise the working of their organization. So this was the planning as far as from the perspective of time. We also need to understand that there is planning based upon the formalization. What does planning based upon the formalization means? Based upon the formalization means that we would have the proactive plan and reactive plan. What is proactive plan? Proactive plan, if we have been able to devise and understand that what kind of plan is required in the future, so accordingly we can plan. So how do we plan that? For planning that, it is very much relevant that the people are at the same page, who the people who have to implement are at the same page, and they have the maximum say in that planning. When will that be happening? That will be only happening if the educators understand that the implementers are aware of the grassroots problems, and they are the people who are the one who are going to implement, so they should have the maximum say as well. So this is one of a kind, and reactive planning is the kind of a planning which we did because of the COVID, because of somehow a problem cropped up, and because of a problem cropped up, we realized that we need to plan for bringing out and solution, so that education is also not suffering, as well as we are able to address the problem, the health issues which may attack the students if they are coming to the school, and the teachers if they are coming to the school. So that was to be taken into consideration. So accordingly the plan was done. Friends, on this note, I take your leave. I shall be joining you back again in the next lecture, in which we shall be talking about further plans. We shall be talking about how the plans are being framed. We shall also be talking about, in today's lecture, we talked about the principles of educational planning. We talked about the characteristics of educational planning, and we also begin talking about why educational planning is so relevant, and what are the key points or key factors which make it so relevant for us to have the educational planning. We talked about what are the reasons for planning education, particularly with respect to the nation like India, which has a lot of dynamism from at the social aspect as well as cultural aspect and the economic aspect. We talked about kind of planning. In that, we talked about planning based upon the time horizon, and we also talked about the planning based upon the reaction, or we can say the planning decided by the approach, that is proactive planning and reactive planning. So we shall be discussing further classification which is done for the planning in my next lecture. On this note, I, Dr. Renu Tomar, is signing off. Namaskar, Jai Hind. Have a healthy and safe life. Thank you. Namaskar for being with me.